I don't think that's done that right. I'm just going to stare at the screen for a second and see if it actually does anything. I've hit the start button. Oh, it is. It's working. There we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's session. We are tonight talking about communication, and I want to make it really clear that what we're actually talking about is communication in its wider sense rather than just communication for students with special educational needs, which is where we usually end up focusing. So let me see if I can get my presentation to work, which would be that button. That was a good start. There we go. Okay, so the invisible thread in every SEND interaction. So here I've got a slide which is, basically reiterating that invisible thread in every SEND interaction point, but kind of really trying to get across that focus that this isn't about just communicating with students. Most of the time when things are going wrong in schools, it is because of communication or lack thereof. So usually it's because communication has broken down, either between SENCO and the parent, or between the parent and the school in general, or between SLT and the staff, or between staff and the students. There's a whole combination of different things that we can have there. But usually when things are going wrong, it will boil down to a communication issue that we're actually having to deal with. So it's really important that we get communication right for everybody in the format that works best for everybody. And that is going to be different depending on which audience we're actually working with. So just to set the scene about communication in its little bunny ears there, it isn't just about talking, it is everything. Speech and language therapists talk to us about this. It's to do with body language, it's to do with our tone of voice, it's to do with our gestures and our facial expressions and all of those things that come with it, including our proximity to somebody. So how close we're standing to them when we actually say something. It goes beyond words. And it's really interesting because I'm delivering this as a webinar. Obviously, I can't see how many people are online. I'm kind of talking to a piece of glass in front of me, which is really weird. And it's very depersonalized, if you like, which has its benefits in that I'm not embarrassed. I can waffle away without any problem whatsoever. I'm not looking at facial expressions and getting worried because somebody's yawning or anything else. But then also, I'm not getting that feedback. I'm not getting that information, that two-way passage of things that tell me, am I doing this right? Or am I giving people what they actually want? So it's a really interesting one being on the webinar side of things, and you as a recipient are on the other side of it. Do you want more engagement? Want less engagement? Do you wish I'd just stop waffling for 2 minutes? It's a really interesting dynamic. But in a classroom, we have usually, I'm going to say usually, we normally have humans interacting with humans. When we're dealing with parents, we might be dealing face-to-face, so human to human, but we might also be dealing with it via email. And of course, we know that people read emails, people read anything slightly differently. They're not always going to read it exactly the same way. So it's interpretation and understanding. And if, of course, our communication, our written communication is perhaps above the literacy level of the person reading it, they might not fully understand what we're trying to say to them. So communication is more than just the voice. It also, I've put there the foundation, it underpins learning, relationships, behaviour, well-being, and it creates the framework through which SEN support, in fact any support, is effective. And for us, it's about those different directions that things go. So kind of supporting students with their needs, but also supporting adults to meet students' needs with regards to communication. That's kind of part and parcel of the SENCO job, but actually communication in a whole needs to be addressed as well. So I've called this 5 layers of communication. I'm just going to go through those with you. So we operate on different levels at different times. So every layer has its own nuances, its own bits that go with it. So first of all, we've got that verbal communication, that's spoken and written language. So written language is still verbal communication because we're getting a message across that we could read out. And the words we choose, the way we structure those sentences, whether we use short, snappy sentences or long, convoluted ones with lots of adjectives and adverbs in there, that will really set the scene for communication. And it also affects the way that it is perceived by the recipient. So if any of you have used Copilot, for example, to help you construct an email response, they're very robotic, they're very clinical, they're very not humanistic at all. So, that's how we can usually tell that something's been produced by AI, because it doesn't sound like a human that's actually writing it. I actually use emails, and it feeds it into it, which makes it sound a little bit more like me, but it usually gets the wrong end of the stick of the actual email it's replying to. That's another story altogether, though. But like I say, spoken and written language, the way we talk is unique to each individual. So although some of us will mimic the way that other individuals talk, and perhaps we can hear that in ourselves sometimes. You can either hear your mum yelling at you when you were a kid as you're yelling at your own kids, or you hear the way you're actually addressing something. I know I watch quite a lot of YouTube crime series, and there's a particular speaker on there, and I've heard myself occasionally dripping into the way that she delivers things rather than my own style of delivering things. I don't know why, it's just habit, I suppose, and something that we get used to doing. But it is important, and we have different formats for things. So when we're talking with our boss, we generally use more formal language than we would with our spouses, or when we're talking to our own children, we're a bit more endearing than we are when we're talking to the children in our classes at school. So we do change that communication style according to the audience. We've also got on there non-verbal signals, so I use my hands an awful lot. If any of you ever see me present live, I generally try to wear something with pockets so I can keep them still, or I'll have a fidget that I can sit and fidget with instead, which tends to focus things a little bit more. Put my hands down and stop fidgeting for a minute. But body language, our hand signals, our facial expressions, our eye contact, our personal space, the proximity to somebody, they all actually give a message as well. So standing close to a student can signal either comfort, or it could be signalling you're doing something wrong. So really thinking about where we are positioning ourselves when we're saying something to somebody. It can be really helpful for those students who have processing difficulties. So if they're struggling to process the words that we're saying, our body language, our facial expressions, our gestures, our proximity, all of those things may actually help to get the message across to them. Certainly taking somebody by the hand and leading them to something, which is what a toddler would do with you, is one way of communicating. They don't have the words for what they want, so they will take you and lead you. It's pretty much the same thing, or they will point to something, or they'll use a facial expression to show, no, that's not what I want, sad face. It's all of those kinds of things that we use as well. We then have what I'm going to call I'm not going to call it, it is a term, paralinguistic features, so elements. So our tone of voice. I've got a fairly calm voice most of the time. I don't tend to get hyped up, and when I do, it does get a bit shrieky, which is why I tend not to do it. Our volume, so I'm a relatively quiet speaker apart from when I need to get a message across, in which case teacher voice comes out. Our pace of speaking, and again, myself, I'm a very rapid talker. I read very quickly and I talk very quickly. So people trying to take notes when I'm talking really, really struggle sometimes. I can slow it down, but it doesn't feel natural to me to slow down. And then those strategic pauses that we put in place. I know that I do put strategic pauses in place. I don't have to think about them. They come relatively automatically where I'm thinking about something, but they make up our speech patterns. They make up our layers of communication. And when we're talking with individuals, whether it's a parent or a professional or a student, what we're actually looking for are, what is our tone of voice? What is our volume? What is our pace that we're actually using with them? I tend to talk a little bit more slowly when I'm working with students than I do when I'm delivering a webinar or when I'm talking with professionals. When I'm talking with parents, my tone of voice is very definitely going to be calm and fairly neutral. It's not going to be emotional, or at least I try to avoid being emotional with them. My volume might be, at an acceptable level, because I want to model to them, don't shout at me. You don't need to shout at me. You can hear me perfectly well, and I'm talking in a normal voice. So we're using all of those things as we're communicating. I was going to say something else there, and I've completely forgotten what it was. Digital channels there we've got as well. So emails, text messages, online platforms, they all kind of bring with them their own problems, is probably the best way of putting this, including response time. And lots of you always ask the question, should I have to respond to this email within 20 minutes of receiving it? The answer is no. But very often we set that precedent for ourselves. We go in there and we are, that email's come up, I'll respond to it straight away. And we set up this unrealistic way of working for ourselves. Then we start to kick ourselves because we can't do it anymore. So we've got that to it. We've got that emotional tone that is lost within emails and text messages and, WhatsApp or whatever else it is you're using. And the choice of words. So sometimes, if an individual can't spell something, you will all know this, you're all teachers, you will know that if somebody can't spell something, they will choose an alternative word, but the alternative word that they have chosen may not be the right one for what they're actually trying to say. Or maybe they lack the vocabulary to actually say what they want to say, which could be verbal, of course, but generally tends to come across more in emails and text messages. And then down there, I've got tacit signals as well. So what's not said, but what is implied. It's almost like reading between the lines type thing that we talk about in English literature, English language. It's the silence, the assumptions, if I've said, I got wet walking across the playground, that you are reading between the lines that it was probably raining or somebody threw water at me. I actually haven't said that. I said I got wet walking across the playground, but you read between the lines. And for our SEN students and for a lot of our parents, they're not very good at reading between the lines. So they miss the nuance of what we're actually saying. Communication in the classroom. So this is where majority of learning actually happens. Let's just face it. And if our teachers are not great at communicating, then our students are not getting a great deal. They're missing out. So we need our teachers to understand that they need to be clear with instructions. They need to be able to support those instructions with gestures or visuals, whatever else it supports. They need to be able to encourage students to ask questions that make them feel like they are going to respond to them, not just that they're going to be dismissed because you dared to ask me a question. And you all know that it happens. So I'm not sharing anything unusual there. And we all have a bad day, and we've all done it, where it's like, well, you're not listening, that kind of thing. We've all done that occasionally. But this is important. It's really important that our teachers understand how vital it is that their vocabulary they're using, their explanations that they're giving, their enunciation of vocabulary is clear and helps students to understand, not confuse them further. We've also got pupil voice there. So our students need to have a voice. Voice might be written, it might be recorded, it might be verbal, it might be visual, whatever it is, but they need to be able to ask for help without being shamed about it. They need to be able to develop their vocabulary. So I know a lot of my students certainly, who you could use. I remember I taught science. I could use the vocabulary with them. I could teach them vocabulary, but they found it really difficult to say the words. So even though they might actually be able to write it, or they might know what it is I was talking about, they didn't necessarily have the skill to wrap their tongue around the syllables that were in some chemical formula that we were looking at, or whatever it was we were doing. So one of my strategies was certainly, whenever I'm introducing new vocabulary, is to get them to repeat it back to me. It's such a simple thing, but they're getting that chance to say it out loud rather than just hearing it or seeing it. They're actually getting to bring it out of their mouth. I was a self-taught reader, so I learnt to read sitting on my mum's knee. She was reading stories to me. I didn't learn when I went to school. And I still find now that when I come across a word I haven't seen before, I can read it in my head, but trying to get it out of my mouth, I find it actually quite difficult until somebody actually says it for me, because I just don't have the sound bank, I suppose, to fall back on. I've put peer interactions on there. So we have got friendships that we need to navigate, our own and those of our students. We've got social dynamics that sit in there. We've got that whole social media experience that's going on for them. So this is going to impact on what's going on in the classroom for them, but also beyond the classroom. So whether that's at break time or lunchtime, or whether that is outside in the community, in the evenings, the weekends, the holidays, when they move from one school to the next, all of those things, they dance around each other, and they are a part of communication. And then we've got hidden language barriers. So it isn't always apparent that somebody doesn't understand you. They may well nod. We have lots of nodding dogs. They may well smile. They may quickly glance out the corner of their eye and see what everybody else is doing and mimic what everybody else is doing. They may well mimic a response that they've heard somebody else use, but without fully understanding what that response is that they are giving. And that is a concern, I suppose, certainly as children get older. It's certainly how we learn. So, we learn by mimicking and aping. But it's more of a concern when they get older and they're still relying on those strategies rather than understanding the communication that's being given to them. And when we start to see behaviour issues in students, so into junior school, secondary school, and we're not really sure why, it's always worth exploring this communication strand. Is there something within speech and language that we're not actually getting here? Although I did say I wasn't going to focus on students today. Engaging with our families then, and this is really important. We want what we call authentic partnerships with our parents, carers. But that can be quite difficult because they come with their own experiences. They possibly come with their own difficulties. They come with their own preconception of what it's going to be like to talk to you. So we do need to have a way of communicating with parents that works. Now, if you are in a school that has 71 different languages, then that's going to be a challenge. It's one of the great uses of AI and the internet is that we can now translate things pretty much instantly and with a good deal of accuracy, unlike a few years ago. So we have got that to fall back on, but it doesn't replace a human kind of talking with you. It's not quite the same. Clear, consistent communication that is respectful. Recognising parents as an expert on their own child, but also they need to give some of that back to you as well. In other words, they also need to be clear and respectful in their communication, and they need to respect your professional knowledge. Now, I'm not here to train parents, and I'm not here to criticise parents either, but that is where the balance, to me, certainly talking to SENCOs, seems to have shifted somewhat, and parents feel that they're not seen as the expert, or they're demanding to be seen as the expert, and that the SENCO view is pushed aside, but also that communication side of things, it's very respectful from the school side because we're I suppose bound by professional guidance, if you like, but from the parent side it can be quite hot-headed. There's a nice phrase to use for it, quite hot-headed. So we need to be careful how we respond to that. Now, I have had in the past, I had one parent who was incredibly abusive to me down the phone, and I, from experience of dealing with her, and it was because I had experience dealing with her, I simply cut her off mid-sentence, spoke over her as she was yelling at me, and said, "I'm really sorry, you're yelling at me. I can't understand what you're saying because you're yelling too loudly. I'm going to put the phone down. When you've calmed down, feel free to call me back." I couldn't have done it with all of my families, but I was certainly able to do it with her. And she did. She went and got herself a drink, and she came back about an hour later and she said, "I'm so sorry. I was really wound up. Can we start again?" And we had a more serious conversation. She was still upset. She was still annoyed at what had happened. I can't even remember what had happened. I think a kid had got a detention for something. But she was still annoyed at it, but she was in a much calmer place. And sometimes people do need that reality check of, hey, hold on a minute. I can't help you while you're yelling at me. Equally so, I've had a parent launch themselves across the table at me and go to slap me, hit me, whatever you like, because I said, I'm really sorry, but the office has not passed that communication on to me. So what had happened was she had come into the school during the summer holiday. She had allegedly, apparently, asked for me to get in contact with her over the summer holiday. And of course, this message had not come to me at all. And then she'd come to the open evening and arrived at the open evening. And then she's standing in front of me saying, you haven't got in contact with me. And I'm completely on the back foot here with, I didn't know I needed to contact you. Who are you? Which she didn't like because I'm saying, who are you? She expected me to know who she was. School of 750 kids, of course I'm going to know who you are, bearing in mind your child doesn't actually come here. So she got really quite irate about it. And then because she's saying to me, you should have responded to me, you should have sent me an email, you were supposed to do this. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that communication hasn't been passed to me. She didn't like that. So she launched herself across the table at me. Fortunately, another parent pulled her back. So I was very, very lucky. But that was a very interesting exchange. And it shows how communication can break down really, really quickly. And again, I wasn't confrontational. I am as calm as I'm talking to you now with, I'm really sorry, but I didn't get that communication. I can't send you an email when I don't have your email. So it was a really eye-opening experience is probably what I want to say, where I really did feel quite vulnerable at the time. And I have to be fair, she did send her child to us the following year. And she was not on the SEN register, and the parent wanted the child to be on the SEN register, and I declined. So this had come through to me via the form tutor, which is great. But I said, no, because we're not doing anything additional to or different from. She doesn't need anything that's additional to or different from. So I'm not going to put her on my SEN register. I don't know why the parent was quite insistent she wanted her on. I think she wanted the additional attention, I suppose. But the parent did not want to talk to me. So we had to put another member of staff in place to hold that communication with her. And that was fine until she wanted more. And then, of course, that person couldn't make decisions because those decisions had to come to me. And because I wasn't in the meetings, because she didn't want me in the meetings, she was getting quite annoyed and irate because nobody was able to make decisions for her at that, like that instantly. Like knowing her email address off the top of my head. Anyway, difficult conversations then. So when we get complaints, when we get EHC requests, when we've got unmet expectations, it can be really difficult to forget there's a child at the centre of all of this. So whether we're balancing something with our families or whether we're balancing it with a member of staff sometimes as well, we've got to remember that at the centre of all of this, there is a child. And then down at the bottom, I've put there, balancing the truth with hope. So trying to avoid some professional jargon fog, kind of using words that perhaps we use, the alphabet soup, but that perhaps parents are not quite aware of. Being honest about our challenges, being realistic about the outcomes. I have had far too many individuals set children up for failure by telling them, oh, yes, of course you're going to get whatever at the end of the year, or, yep, you're going to be an amazing lawyer or doctor or whatever it is. It's about being honest with families with children, with staff. It's about being realistic about what you can put in place in your school. And I know that's getting more complicated with ordinarily available provision seeming to include everything possible, including, equine therapy with a seahorse. It might as well be on there because that's kind of feels like what some of those documents are starting to look like. But it is important that we hold some kind of realism within there, especially as most of the time for this, we're not actually dealing with the parents who have an EHCP for their student, because to be fair, that's legally binding. If it's in there, we're going to be doing it anyway. You haven't got a choice in that. That's your best endeavours. So we've got to do that. Most of the time, the conflict that we have is with parents whose child either needs an EHCP or they feel they need an EHCP, or they're sitting at that SEN support level and we don't have perhaps the funding for it, or we don't have the capacity to include them in a particular group that term, but maybe we could look at doing it next term instead. So it's really important to be honest and realistic about things. I've put in here professional networks and specialist language because we do use it. We do speak with professionals an awful lot of the time. So we have got education psychologists there. They're pretty good at using some wonderful long words sometimes, usually psychological terminology. We've got speech and language therapists, which, to be fair, are usually pretty good at giving us things that we can understand. I think they understand communication. We've got occupational therapy. And because it's occupational, it's almost like, is school an occupation? Education an occupation? It is for me, but is it for a student? It's one of those weird terms, isn't it? And then we've got CAMS and mental health services. And there's always a risk of what we're saying being lost in translation, because what I understand by particular use of a term might not be the exact same use of that term that a particular specialist uses. We also have the flipped way round on that as well. Sometimes they are sharing things with us, and I'm thinking here, your specialist teachers, your education psychologists, they're sharing something like a cognitive assessment with you, and you're thinking, what on earth is spatial awareness or quantitative analysis? What is going on here? It's important that we try to understand those terms as well, and if we don't understand them, to say, can you give me the dummies guide, or could you give me the quick idiots guide to this one, because I'm not really sure what you're trying to say. Yes, okay, you could use AI or Google to go and find it, but go straight to the horse's mouth, go straight to the EP or the specialist teacher and say, I love this, let's go for the hearing impaired. I love this audiology report you've just given me. It's a brilliant graph. I ain't got a clue what it's saying to me though. Tell me about it. Because they'll laugh and they'll share that information. And then the next time you get a report, you've actually got something you understand, because you can apply that knowledge to something else. It's your own teaching, it's your own learning. Systems and documentation then. So these do act as a form of communication. So they are something that we're using with mostly parents and carers, and with our teaching staff within school or our support staff within school. So whatever you're calling it, whether it's an IEP, a plan, a passport, a profile, a piece of paper, I really don't care what you call it. It doesn't matter what it's called. It's about communicating information. And very often we get the question of, do I have to create a passport for every student who's on my SEN register? And it's a really tricky answer, because technically, no. You don't have to create anything for them. You have to record what provision is in place for them and whether they are meeting their targets within that provision. So technically, no. However, how does a teacher know what to do to support little Freddie or whoever it is in their classroom if you don't share the information with them? And they don't want to look at the provision report because the provision's irrelevant to their classroom teaching. So we do have to share information somehow. We have to communicate it. I've seen it done hundreds of different ways, literally hundreds of different ways. I've seen it shared different ways. So whether it's on a SharePoint or a Teams or a Google Drive, whether it's via specific software, whether it's sitting in something like Insight or within Sims or whatever your MIS is. I've also seen it done with PowerPoint presentations at the beginning of the year, and then people get a copy of the PowerPoint and they've got one slide for each student. I've seen it done on Word documents. I've seen it done as class profiles, where we put the information about a whole class on one profile. I've seen it where teachers have to sit down at the beginning of the year and write their class register out, very old-fashioned, and then add the information into it about the children that are on their SEN register. I say I have seen it done in multiple different ways, and within some schools it works, and within others it doesn't. Again, from my own experience, I remember one year in a secondary school I was working in, I sat and I created class profiles. I did individual profiles for the students and the parents, but I then created class profiles according to which sets they were in. So they may well be in one English set and a different math set and a different science set, and then a different kind of foundation subjects set. So, at least 4 different ways of having to create these. So I'm going to take little Freddie. I had taken his information and then transferred it onto his maths, English, science, whatever classes. And then I'd added in the other students that are in his class with their profile. So each teacher, instead of having to go to the individual's profile, and instead of having to pull the information, it was all done for them. It was all there. And we printed them out. So I did 70 copies for all of the staff in the school. We put them in a beautiful ring binder for each member of staff. We got them to sign for the ring binder to say, yes, I have received this. Those profiles, I'm going to call them, had on there what that student should be working towards, what support we were giving them from the SEN department, what reading age they had and spelling age, because I had that data, and CATS data as well. It also had on there their main difficulty. So not necessarily their area of need, but where they experienced their main difficulties. And then if they had any access arrangements, exam arrangements, they were listed on there as well. So it's a fairly straightforward document, quite easy to look at, bit of a class profile. And if it didn't matter who was going in the classroom, especially if you were leaving a cover lesson, you could just leave this out so that the member of staff could have a quick glance at it and go, oh, right, okay, I've got this to deal with. Of those 70 staff, I can honestly count on one hand the number of staff who actually used it. I had spent my whole summer creating those, and there was less than 5 staff who regularly used those binders, which was really disappointing because I thought I was doing them a favour. I thought I was making their life easier, and it wasn't about that for them. They needed a whole culture change, and giving them the information, almost spoon-feeding them the information, was not actually going to achieve that culture change, because they still felt, well, they're SEN kids, they're yours. So it doesn't matter, you've given me a piece of paper. So that's just my learning curve from that one. That's not to say it wouldn't work in another school, and it certainly worked for 5 of the teachers. I've seen something similar done recently, where actually instead of the SENCO sitting and writing all of those, each teacher at the beginning of the year is given a number of what's the word I'm looking for? Staff meetings to look at their classes that they have, and to write their own class profiles. So they have to do a seating plan. They have to go through the information that is held in a centralised system about all students, and they have to write a class profile along with what they are going to do within their subject and lessons to support those students. I've seen that done really well. I'm going to go back and I'm going to find out, once they've had it in place for a year, exactly how it's been reviewed and what's happened with that. But that was an interesting way of approaching it. Yeah, how we present it, I am one for bullet points because people don't want to read an essay. They're not going to read it. Let's put it that way. And it just helps everybody. And then we've got to find that sweet spot for ourselves between comprehensive record keeping and practical communication. So we might want to record everything, but is that really useful to people? And if it is useful, is it useful to everyone, or do we need a condensed version for other staff? This one about the communication without words. So those subtle things. So from our pupils, we get signals all of the time. We get their silence, we get their withdrawal, we get them acting out. Actually, we get the same thing with parents as well. If they suddenly start withdrawing from us, what's going on? Why? What's brewing under the surface? They're all really powerful forms of communication, and they come from overwhelm usually. That usually they're coming from a place of, I can't cope with this anymore, and therefore I'm going to shut myself down because it's safer in there. Or they're acting out because they can't cope anymore and they need to express how they're feeling, but it's not quite the right expression that we were expecting from them. So it is usually a cry for help. We say all behaviour is communication. There we go. Here's our reason why children will do these things. We've got adult communication. So body language in meetings, the tone of emails, the timing of their responses, they all carry messages to us about stress levels, about their engagement with what we're actually saying, about any underlying concerns that sit within there. I'm actually really bad at this. Like, I used to be a chair of governors, and I have really bad posture. There's no two ways about it. So this chair's not too bad. It keeps me sat up straight. But when I'm sat in meetings, I'm very often leaning forward, or I might put my arms down. And sometimes I'll even put my head on my chin on my hands. I will kind of get into a position that's comfortable for me. So I can come across sometimes as my body language being, I'm bored or I'm dismissing. And I know that I sit like this a lot in meetings, especially when I'm online on a webinar or something. And it's not that I'm not listening, it's just comfortable holding my head up, because holding my head up makes my neck ache. I'm getting old. Just be careful how we read body language. If the body language of somebody we know relatively well has changed, that is more of a signal to us than somebody who just looks disengaged, because they may just have that natural feature. There was a phrase a few years ago, which I'm not going to say because it's slightly inappropriate, but it was to do with a resting bleep face. So, the very deadpan face. And some people have that very not neutral face, sour looking face. They look like they're sucking on a lemon. We've got some people who have a naturally looking smiley face, but they might not actually be smiling. We've got other individuals who you cannot read their facial expression. They have totally neutral poker face. We can't always read into that. We certainly work with one of our partners, one of our sponsors, who, she's lovely, she's absolutely amazing, but she has got the most poker face possible, that you cannot read anything until she starts to talk, and then she becomes animated and you get that expression from her. And then I've put on there environmental reading, so those skills to read the room. sensing the tension, sensing what's going on, reading between the lines, our resilience to things, whether somebody's enthusiastic or whether they're confused. That I used to work for Olan Mills many moons ago when I was probably about 15, 16 years old. And if you remember Olan Mills, they were the photographers that used to come in. And I used to have to phone people up, cold calling, to try and persuade them to buy studio photos. You shoot me for those sins. It paid. And I always remember in my training session being told, I don't care how you are feeling, but you will put a smile on your face before you speak to somebody. Because if you are smiling when you speak, it comes across in your tone of voice. And I've always remembered that when I'm on a phone call with people. I don't use the phone very often, but when I'm on a phone call with somebody, I will always try to make sure I've got my smile ready, because I do think it makes a difference. I'm not very good at doing it on webinars, though, where I'm looking at the camera and I can see myself, because I just don't like my smile. There you go. Okay. Our barriers and our biases in communication. So we do have to address those obstacles. We've got cultural communication difficulties that may appear, or differences, I should say. So in some cultures, eye contact, directness, questioning authority, so questioning teachers, expressing disagreement, they are all considered taboo. Putting your thumbs up in certain cultures is considered to be rude or offensive. So we do need to be careful about our cultural considerations in communication. We also need to be aware of those hidden disabilities amongst professionals, adults, staff, parents, etc., as much as we do within our students. So I've got to get a list there. Auditory processing disorder, which is a relatively new kind of label that we seem to be giving, but is certainly an interesting one. Autism, anxiety. So when somebody is anxious, they are possibly not listening amazingly well, whereas other times they may be. So that communication is just going to wash straight over them, or anything else that might impact their communication, but it's not immediately obvious. It is a hidden disability. And then our own capacity. So managing all of those conversations on a daily basis, but having sufficient time to process them, reflect on them, respond thoughtfully to them. I have been guilty in the past of being so exhausted at the end of the day that when I go to respond to something, my responses come across as a bit short shrift. They are a little bit snappy, both verbally and in email. I can be quite short in an email. And it's not that I am being short, it's just I have reached my limit. I've filled my bucket full. I cannot give any more to anybody. You're just going to get a response. So yeah, thinking about those things, communication fatigue is what I've called it. A couple of principles for us then. So we need to be clear, concise and consistent, straightforward language. We need to make sure our method matches our message. So if it's going to be a life-changing decision, don't do it by email. Match that communication channel with the way we're actually delivering it. Visual support and scaffolds where possible. So we certainly use them with students. We should use them with staff. We should use infographics with staff. We should probably be using them with parents. Think about your SEN information report that you're putting on the website. How parent friendly is it? That kind of thing. And then verifying understanding. So has your message been received the way you intended it to be? Not kind of assuming that people have understood it the way that you have delivered it. So just making sure that we've not missed it. And again, an example of, and it's a very recent example, the curriculum review came out yesterday, and I'd written a sentence. I knew exactly what I meant by it, and it was to do with Key Stage 2 SATs and holistic approaches to them. I knew exactly what I meant, but in the process of actually typing it and changing it into a bullet point and making it look pretty on the sheet, I'd lost part of the other sentence and it lost its meaning. So somebody read it and went, Oh, they're replacing Key Stage 2 SATs with holistic assessments and teacher portfolios, which is not quite what I meant. It, it is mentioned in there, it's about holistic assessment of the writing, but that's not quite how my message came across. So just being really careful about how we put things out there. We are a communication bridge, so we do translate policy into practice. We do that on a daily basis. That is kind of fundamental of our job, I suppose. We do translate professional language into family language or carer language. We do translate pupil voice into plans, or whatever it is we're trying to communicate there. And we do bridge between multiple individuals. We kind of sit at that conduit in the middle and we spider out to lots of different individuals. And it's important that we have that vocabulary for doing it. So we need to have a clear way of communicating with professionals, with parents, with students, and with staff. It has got to be those 4 different stakeholders, if you like, who we need to be able to communicate with. And most people will fall into one of those 4 categories. And we need to be able to get across our message clearly and concisely and in language that people understand and are not getting confused with. So my last 2 slides for you. Over the next couple of weeks, we are diving into communication a little bit more. So we have got 2 more webinars. One is talk, type and tacit signals, which is a bit more looking at pupil interaction. So we're going to dive into the pupil bit rather than that wider communication strategy. And then we've got one on reading between the lines. So developing those skills to decode stakeholder language. So whoever it is we're talking about, so what it actually is a parent saying when they say, I'm not happy, or what is it that the student is saying, or what is it we're trying to say when we want something to read between the lines. And then don't forget, you have got the SENCO diet out there. It's available on the website. It has already been released. Communication is our November theme. Communication in all its forms is actually the full theme for it. So it isn't just about speech, language and communication. It is about written communication and all of those forms that come there as well. So do go and have a look at the SENCO diet, because there are lots of resources and articles and bits and pieces on there to support you with that. And then my final slide there is, Joe, I looked at that image earlier on today and thought he looks like he's sitting on the toilet, but he isn't. He's sitting there pondering his pile of books. How do I know that what I've communicated has truly been understood? If we ask ourselves that, then I think we're on the right path. So if you are somebody who is struggling with staff, getting them on board, struggling with parents who are getting a little bit antsy, maybe just sitting down and going, how do I know what I've communicated has been truly understood, or is somebody misunderstanding something? And as I say, most of the time when things are going wrong in school or with anything, it's to do with communication. It's not to do with what's actually being done. It's to do with how it's being communicated. So bear that in mind. Take from this what you find useful. Go and have a look at the resources on the website and take care of yourselves, because it isn't an easy job. And let me bring my image back. Hang on, that's not the right one. No, it's not letting me do it. I give up. We'll just leave it on the last slide. Yeah, take care of yourselves, because it isn't the easiest job, and communication is one of those things that lots of us struggle with for different reasons, and is one that you do get better at, but you also have to take the knocks along the way sometimes as well. And you do learn from your mistakes, including parents that like to launch themselves across the table at you. or yell at you down the phone. Anyway, take care, everybody. I will see you in a couple of weeks' time, not next week because I'm doing something, and we will have our next webinar session. Bye-bye. It says it's going to be bye-bye, but it's not going to be bye-bye because I need to stop this doing